I woke up on my 67th birthday to the familiar quiet of my Park Avenue apartment. No balloons, no flowers, no phone calls waiting on the machine. Just silence. Still, I pulled out the mixing bowls and cocoa powder, determined to keep one tradition alive: the chocolate cake I had baked for Clara every year since she was a child. My hands, stiff with arthritis, protested as I whisked the batter, but I pressed on. The smell of sugar and vanilla filled the kitchen, a bittersweet reminder of all the birthdays I had once hosted with laughter and candles. I set the cake to cool and checked the time. Noon already. Clara hadn't called. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was busy with work or the children. By afternoon, the excuses grew thinner. Every vibration of my phone sent my heart racing, but the notifications were only from bank alerts and delivery promos. Trying to distract myself, I picked up my iPad to pull up the frosting recipe I'd bookmarked. That's when I noticed an unfamiliar email notification. Clara must have accidentally synced one of her accounts to my device years ago. Normally, I would have ignored it, but the subject line froze me. Guardianship planning. I tapped it open. My daughter's name appeared at the top, and just beneath it, Dominic's. His words glared back at me. Once she's declared incompetent, the assets are ours. We just have to be patient. My chest tightened. I reread the line again and again, unable to breathe. They weren't just neglectful. They were waiting for me to lose my mind so they could take everything Daniel and I had built. By evening, the cake sat untouched on the counter. The apartment grew darker, lonelier. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed at last. Clara's text blinked on the screen. "Happy birthday, Mom. You should have reminded me." I stared at her message, then at the cake, then at the damning email. The ache in my hands felt like fire, but my voice came out steady as I whispered to the empty room, "No more." And with that, I turned off the phone and began to plan what came next. The morning light filtered through my curtains, cold and indifferent. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cake from the night before, its frosting cracked, the air around it heavy with sugar and regret. Part of me still wanted to believe Clara had simply been busy, that she would call with an apology, that she would show up with Iris and Julian, pretending nothing had happened. Against my better judgment, I typed a short message. "Would you like to stop by for cake?" I placed the phone beside me, watching the seconds tick into hours. Noon passed, then 2, then 4. At last, the phone buzzed. My heart leapt, foolishly, clinging to hope, but the message burned hotter than fire. "We need space from you. Don't reach out anymore." A moment later, I saw Dominic's name pop up with a small blue thumbs up, a like, as though dismissing me were entertainment. The words sliced through me. I thought of Clara's first tuition payment at Brown, the check I'd written without hesitation. I remembered wiring money to cover Daniel's failed landscaping company when creditors circled. I remembered Iris's piano lessons, Julian's private school tuition, vacations, orthodontist bills, endless expenses I had carried so they could live untouched by worry, all of it reduced to a text that severed me from their lives. I closed my eyes and heard Daniel's voice as if he were sitting beside me. "Generosity is wasted if it feeds only entitlement." He had said it once when I paid off Clara's first apartment debt. I had brushed him aside then, telling myself he didn't understand a mother's love. Now his words rang like prophecy. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window. The city lights flickered like stars fallen to earth. My reflection stared back at me. Not weak, not erased. For decades, I had defined myself by what I gave. Now, staring into the Manhattan night, I felt something shift inside. I whispered into the glass, "If they want space, I'll give them more than they ever imagined." I sat at my desk, surrounded by old boxes of paperwork, the kind I used to keep neatly organized in labeled folders, but had long since stopped paying attention to. Dust clung to the edges, and I sneezed as I pulled one open. Inside lay decades of my life written in numbers and signatures. There was the bill of sale for Daniel's vintage Mustang, the car he had polished every Sunday until it gleamed. I had sold it quietly, tears burning in my eyes, just so Clara wouldn't graduate college burdened with loans. I told myself Daniel would have wanted it that way, though I never truly believed it. Next came the wire transfer slip for $150,000. Clara's wedding at a vineyard in Napa Valley, a fairy tale she and Dominic could never have afforded. I remember watching her walk down the aisle in lace and pearls, believing the check I'd written was the down payment on her happiness. Then a larger check stub, $300,000, for the Westchester house, Clara's dream home with a yard for the children. I had told her it was a gift, but inside, I had prayed it would be the roots that finally bound us together as family. Tucked in another envelope were hospital receipts for Julian's broken leg, which I had covered discreetly. They never knew the surgery would have bankrupted their savings. I carried that secret like a badge of love, proof that I would always protect them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of papers fanned across the desk. Nearly every milestone in Clara's adult life had been underwritten by me. Yet not once in all these years had she looked me in the eye and asked, "Mom, how are you?" The forgotten birthday, the cruel text, and the sinister email weren't isolated wounds. They were the sum of everything I refused to see. I was not mother, nor grandmother, nor elder. I was the open wallet that never closed. I slid the papers back into the box, shut the lid, and for the first time let myself wonder what would happen if I refused to open it again. The papers still sat on my desk when I reached for the phone. My hands no longer trembled the way they had the night before. Grief had hardened into something steadier. I dialed Harold Price, the family attorney who had handled everything from Daniel's estate to Clara's first apartment lease. He answered with his usual warmth, but I didn't waste time. "Harold," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "How fast can we restructure the trust distributions?" There was a pause, a subtle shift in the air, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "Elena, you know, these arrangements have been in place for years. May I ask what prompted this?" What prompted it? I almost laughed. Decades of being treated like a purse. Harold, and an email that reminded me my family is only waiting for me to lose my mind so they can take what's left. His silence told me he understood more than he wanted to say. Finally, he exhaled. "If you're certain, we can suspend the automatic transfers immediately, 48 hours at most." "Do it," I replied. 2 days later, without fanfare or announcement, the river dried up. No more mortgage payments, quietly handled on their behalf. No more credit card balances, vanishing like magic. No more tuition checks, drifting from my account into theirs. I sat in my armchair that evening, tea cooling beside me, feeling a strange lightness in my chest for the first time in years. I wasn't bracing for the next request, the next guilt-laced phone call. The silence wasn't empty. It was mine. Yet, as the night stretched on, I could feel it. The weight of Clara's silence pressing in from the other side. She hadn't noticed yet, but she would. The storm wasn't far off, and when it broke, it would come crashing straight through my door. I closed my eyes, steadying myself, and waited for the sound of the first crack in their carefully built world. The silence didn't last long. By the second morning, my phone began to light up like Times Square. The first call was Clara, her voice sugar-coated. "Mom, maybe there's been a bank mistake. Could you check with Harold?" I let it ring out, watching her name disappear from the screen. By afternoon, the tone shifted. Another voicemail. "The mortgage bounced. Mom, please call me back. This is serious." Her words were clipped, rushed, the veneer of calm already cracking. When Dominic's voice arrived on my voicemail, it was different, hard, accusing. "This is humiliating. My card was declined at dinner last night in front of clients. Do you have any idea what you've done?" His anger came wrapped in entitlement, as if I owed him not just money but reputation. By evening, the calls came one after another, stacking on top of each other like falling dominoes. Clara's tone flipped between desperate pleading, "Mom, please, we can't cover tuition this month," and sharp blame. "You could have at least warned us." At midnight, the mask slipped entirely. A text from Clara glowed on the screen. "We need that money." Not a question, not an apology, not even a trace of affection, just a demand. Within 24 hours, I counted 47 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and too many texts to bother reading. Through all the noise, one absence was louder than any of it. Not once did they say, "We love you." I left the phone buzzing on my nightstand, its vibrations rattling against the wood like an insect trying to escape a jar. I sipped my tea, stared at the city lights beyond my window, and let the calls fade into background noise. Grief pressed at me, sharp and insistent, but underneath it was something unexpected: liberation. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't theirs to impose. It was mine to keep. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the silence broke with fists against my door. The pounding started before the sun had fully risen, sharp and insistent against the heavy wood of my apartment door. I knew before I looked who it was. When I opened it, Clara stood there disheveled, her hair unbrushed, dark circles under her eyes. Dominic loomed behind her, red-faced and restless, his jaw tight with anger. Without waiting for an invitation, they shoved past me into the living room. "What the hell is going on?" Clara snapped, her voice a mix of panic and accusation. "Our accounts are frozen. The kids' tuition is due this week. How could you do this to us?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, set the kettle on, and began measuring coffee grounds. The quiet clink of the spoon against porcelain filled the room. I wanted them to feel the weight of waiting, the unease of not being in control. Finally, I turned to face them. "Because I'm more than a bank," I said evenly. "It's been 14 months since either of you asked how I was doing. 14 months since you treated me like anything other than a balance sheet." The silence that followed was louder than their earlier pounding. Dominic sneered, muttering something under his breath about drama. Clara's face softened, but her words were polished, rehearsed. "Mom, that's not fair. We've just been busy. You know we care." I held her gaze until she looked away. Then I spoke the words I had been rehearsing in my mind for days. "You have 30 days. Treat me like family, not an ATM. Show me genuine care, not obligation. If you can't, this door stays closed forever." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but I lifted my hand, ending the conversation. The kettle whistled behind me, and I poured the water slowly, my movements calm, deliberate. They left without a goodbye, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood alone in the kitchen, steam rising from the cup in my hand, knowing that 30 days could reveal more lies than truth. The very next day, my phone rang with a chirpy tone I hardly recognized. Clara's voice poured through the line, thick with sugar. "Hi, Mom. Just wondering how you're feeling today. Did you sleep well? Have you eaten?" She spoke as if she were reading from a script, each word polished, each pause calculated. I answered politely, though every syllable lodged in my chest like a stone. By midweek, a delivery arrived at my door. An elaborate bouquet of lilies and roses, their scent filling the apartment. The card read, "Thinking of you always. Love, Clara and Dominic." It was the first bouquet I had received from them in over a decade. Not for my birthday, not for Mother's Day, not even when Daniel passed. Only now when the money had stopped. Then came the children. Iris's voice crackled through the phone, hesitant and uneven. "Hi, Grandma. I wanted to tell you about my day at school." She launched into a stilted description of classes and friends. Her words clipped, rehearsed. It hurt to listen. She had never called me without Clara prompting her. A few days later, a letter arrived from Julian. The handwriting was unusually neat. The sentences oddly formal. "You are awesome, and I love you. I hope we can spend more time together." It read less like a child's note and more like an assignment corrected 3 times before being mailed. I held the paper in my lap and felt tears sting my eyes. My grandchildren were being used as pawns in a desperate performance. I wanted to believe them, to cling to some shred of sincerity, but every gesture rang hollow. That night, I opened my leather-bound journal and wrote, slowly, the pen scratching across the page, "Affection rehearsed is not affection at all." Still, against my better judgment, a tiny part of me waited. Maybe one word, one gesture would ring true. I listened for it in every call, every message, every forced smile. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. Their masks were slipping into place too perfectly, and behind them, something colder waited. Margaret and I had met for lunch at our favorite cafe, a quiet corner spot where the waiters still remembered Daniel's order. I had barely taken a sip of my coffee when she leaned across the table, her voice low but urgent. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. Clara's been talking at the country club. She told people you've been unstable since Daniel died, that you're making reckless financial choices." The cup trembled in my hand, the hot liquid threatening to spill. Margaret hesitated before adding, "They're even suggesting you may need to be evaluated for competency." For a moment, the clinking of cutlery and hum of conversation around us blurred into a dull roar. So that was the game, the flowers, the phone calls, the awkwardly scripted gestures from the children. None of it was affection. It was a defense file carefully built to paint me as erratic, a prelude to seizing what wasn't theirs. I managed a brittle smile for Margaret's sake, but inside, fury coiled, sharp and hot. "Thank you for telling me," I whispered, though my voice shook. When I returned home, I went straight to the phone. My fingers moved with a steadiness I didn't entirely feel. Harold answered on the second ring. "Harold," I said, keeping my tone calm, "I need the truth. Did Clara or Dominic ever ask you about my mental state?" The pause on the line was heavy. Then his voice came slow and reluctant. "Yes, Elena. Clara asked last week." I gripped the receiver until my knuckles whitened. The betrayal settled into my bones, colder than any winter draft. "Thank you," I said quietly, though what I felt was anything but gratitude. After I hung up, I stood in the center of my living room, the city buzzing faintly beyond the glass. My resolve hardened like steel cooling into shape. They wanted incompetence. They would get the opposite. I whispered into the silence, my jaw set. Then I'll show them just how competent I am. The very next morning, I scheduled an appointment with one of the most respected neuropsychologists in Manhattan. I endured hours of memory drills, problem-solving tests, and endless questions about my life. When it was finally over, the doctor smiled warmly and handed me the results, a spotless bill of mental health. No confusion, no decline, no trace of incompetence. I tucked the papers neatly into my purse like a shield I could carry anywhere. That afternoon, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Patricia Chen, a private investigator Daniel had once trusted during a business dispute, answered with the same clipped precision I remembered. I explained the situation, my voice steady, despite the anger simmering beneath it. Within days, Patricia returned with a folder so thick it hardly closed. The contents made my stomach turn. Clara and Dominic were drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out, both cars leveraged, and a second mortgage already bleeding their Westchester home. But the most damning evidence lay deeper in the stacked documents, showing guardianship plans over my estate, drafts of petitions, meeting notes with lawyers, financial forecasts that assumed my assets would be under their control. The email I had stumbled across wasn't carelessness. It was the tip of a scheme they had been building for 5 years. I read every page twice, then set the folder on the table with deliberate care. Rage rolled through me, sharp and cold, but clarity followed. There was no more room for doubt. This wasn't about love or even neglect. This was theft dressed in family clothes. That evening, I called Clara. I made my voice warm, almost eager. "Let's have dinner soon," I said sweetly. "We can talk about restoring things. I've been thinking a lot about family lately." Her relief was immediate, audible through the phone. She gushed about how happy Dominic would be, how the children missed me. I murmured my agreement, then hung up, my hand steady inside. I was already setting the table for a very different kind of dinner, one where the charade would end and the truth would finally be served. The Westchester house looked like a stage set when I arrived. Candles glowing, china gleaming, and smiles stretched a little too tight. Clara rushed to greet me with a kiss on the cheek. Dominic poured me a glass of wine before I had even sat down, and the children offered polite hugs. It was a performance from the moment I stepped through the door. During dinner, the show continued. Clara lifted her glass, her voice syrupy. "To the most generous mother alive," Dominic chimed in. "Our guiding light, always keeping this family together." Iris and Julian echoed their lines, clearly rehearsed, their eyes darting nervously between their parents. I let them speak. I let the food pass, the laughter ring hollow, the compliments pile high like cheap props. And when dessert plates were cleared, I rose slowly, my hands steady on the back of my chair. "These past 2 weeks have been enlightening," I began. The room stilled. Clara leaned forward, her smile fixed, Dominic's hand tightening around his glass. I laid the first card on the table. I had a full neuropsychological evaluation. The results are impeccable. My mind is sharp, my decisions sound. The second followed harder. I also hired Patricia Chen. Her investigation uncovered your debts, your second mortgage, your maxed out cards, and more damning still, the guardianship documents you've been drafting for years. Clara's face drained of color. Dominic cursed under his breath. But I pressed on, and finally I calculated. In the last 5 years alone, I've funneled nearly $1 million into your lives. Mortgage, tuition, cars, trips, dinners, all of it. My generosity has been met with greed. I straightened, letting my pearls catch the candlelight. So hear me clearly. I am cutting you off permanently. This house returns to me, and the estate, $47 million, will no longer be yours to covet. It will fund scholarships and charities, not your entitlement. The children stared, wide-eyed and silent. Clara shook. Dominic raged. I walked to the door, dignity intact. By the time I reached my car, my phone showed 99 missed calls, buzzing with desperation. I started the engine and drove into the night, smiling for the first time in forever.